Hello and good evening to one and all. This is Abhinandan from Mariners Arena, and tonight I bring you a very special episode of Mariners Talk. Tonight's episode is very special only due to the fact that we have a very special guest tonight with us. Well, he does not need an introduction. Why? Because he has been the face of the football broadcasting industry for years. He has been the face of FIFA World Cup 2014, FIFA World Cup 2018, and of course C2K, which was countdown to kick off. With his amazing sense of humor, his amazing sense of wit, his expert analysis, let's welcome Mr. Joe Morrison. So, Joe, welcome to the show. And it's an absolute honor to have you here with us. And how have you been?
Thank you very much. The honor is mine. And the honor is even bigger because you tell me that I'm the first. So
Yes.
That is the biggest honor of all. I'm good. I'm very good. I think no matter what happens, whether it was last year or this year or even at the moment and what's happened recently, you've got to look forward. You've got to stay positive. It's very easy to get dragged down in all the negativity because you're surrounded by it. You're immersed in it. So yeah, I'm good. I'm lucky. I'm very lucky that I'm healthy and I have a positive mindset.
Thank you for your time. And so I'll just give you a brief about Mariners Talk. So it's an online segment, sort of a talk show where we talk about Mohun Bagan Football Club as well as Indian football with various celebrity guests, footballers, experts, analysts. So again,
including Z-list celebrities like me. I'm Z-list, you know.
Amazing. So that brings us to the first question. We're going to start off with the segment about your experience. Like, how did you start off? How did you start your career? What made you pursue this amazing journey that you have been fulfilling for all your life about being a TV anchor and a presenter?
It was an accidental journey. I studied agriculture. I wanted to be a farmer when I was younger. So I have a very close affection and affiliation for the farmers and everything that's been going on this recently with regards to the protests, really hits me. So, farmers feed us. So I wanted to be in agriculture. I wanted to be a farmer. It's a very difficult industry to get into. When I finished university, there was a recession at that time. So it was difficult to find work and jobs. My father had, I don't know what you call it, what you would call it, but like a kiosk, like a newsagent's kiosk, selling newspapers, cigarettes, magazines, that kind of thing. So I joined him in that. It was little shop, little kiosk. And I did that for 6 years. And in that time, I used to have a customer come in every morning, very early, 6:30 a.m., who was a BBC commentator. And we used to chat about sport and football. And for, I think it was the best part of 2 to 3 years, he would say, why don't you come with me and get involved, and I'll get you a trial, or I'll get you an audition or whatever. And for 2 to 3 years, I just said, no, not what I want to do. Too shy. You probably don't believe this, but I think at that time I was too shy. So, but anyway, eventually I relented and went and did it and got in, and the rest, as they say, is history. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, my journey. But I think the most important thing to take out of that journey is I went from being in a completely different world of work, i.e. working in a newsagent, to and being involved in the broadcasting industry. And that was important for me now that I look back, because it gave me a disconnect and a better understanding of audience. And this is something that'll come up a lot in our chat, understanding your audience. I was the fan sitting watching whoever the Joe Morrison was of my time, and I can't even remember, way back then. I was the person sitting watching that TV and watching that presenter present the football and the sport. So whereas nowadays I'm seeing so many that are going straight from school to some sort of journalism course or journalism college or media degree or college, and then straight into some kind of broadcast. And they have no real, what's the word? They have no real sense, Abhi, of the audience. I see that a lot now.
Nice. So that's really inspirational, actually. Such an amazing journey from where you started your career from BBC and now you're here. So it's absolutely phenomenal. I should tell you that people in India really love you, and including me, we always hope to see you live. We always wait for you to come, especially like I was telling you before, like the halftime shows are something that we always look forward to, starting from FIFA World Cup 2014, 18, then C2K, the Champions League. It's absolutely incredible. So Joe, that brings us to Mohun Bagan. I know it is something very dear to you, like it's dear to everybody everywhere around the world. And Mohun Bagan is all about sentiments, it's about pride, it's about emotion. So, talking about Mohun Bagan's legacy, how do you sort of interpret it? Like, according to you, if anybody asks you on the road, a football fan, about Mohun Bagan Football Club, how will you introduce, or what will you say? What will be your diction about the club, about the rich legacy?
Well, you mentioned the word legacy, and the other word that you could throw in there is history. And I think the thing that shocks, because you got to remember, I've been involved in Indian professional football now for, 15, 16 years. There are people like Novi sir who've been there much longer than me, but been involved in Indian football much longer than me. He's like an encyclopedia, is Novi. But what I would say is, that legacy is important. The history is important because it builds a foundation. What are fans looking for, Abhi? They're looking for a connection. Now, if you have that history, I hope that you, at some point in the future, I don't know if you're a father at the moment, but if you become a father, that you take your son or daughter to see the Mariners and see Mohun Bagan in action, to continue that legacy, because that's how it works in the rest of the world. You pass it from one generation to the next. So history and legacy is important. But the thing that I always tell people when I'm traveling and they talk about the history and the legacy of Indian football is I constantly bring up, do you know that the Mariners are older than Juventus? And they're like, what? Because there's been so much noise about the Indian Super League that most people around the rest of the world, and this is, I was going to say it's ignorance, Abhi, but it's not necessarily ignorance. It's just a lack of footballing education and a lack of probably PR and marketing and getting the message out. They all think football in India started with the advent of the ISL, which is crazy. And anyone who's got a bit more understanding of football, global football knowledge, they think that the Indian professional football started with the advent of the I-League, which was back in, was it 2007, the I-League in its modern form? So they think that it's all just a new experience over the last decade or so, which is nonsense, as you know.
What about the famous 1911 IFA Shield? Do you think that marked the start of the journey of India's football legacy and marked the sort of epitome as the journey of Indian football?
Yes, I do. I do think it was a key moment. And I'll tell you why I think it was a key moment, because you've got to remember at that particular point in time, the level of oppression was reaching a crescendo. The bloody Britishers, the Britishers, and the oppression had got to a point whereby it was bubbling under the surface. Things were coming to a head. So, and I always use, when I'm talking about, when anybody asks me, like you have done now, and you're talking about 1911, it was that release. And the only other time that I know off the top of my head that I've seen it done in history was when Iran beat the USA at football back in 1993, I think it was, something like that. So, and at that point, Iran and the USA were at loggerheads, just like they are now. But basically, it was like sticking two fingers up. It was like sticking two fingers up at the British occupiers at that time, number one. So it gave an even greater sense of connection. I'm coming back to that connection for the fans. And then you put on top of that, there would be many Indians at that particular point in time, because let's be frank, it was at best semi-pro, the game, way back then. Yes, they would get little perks and, helped out in numerous ways, or anyone that played for the team, and I'm talking about the British Army teams, they might get a higher rank or a better posting, or kept away from, the dirty jobs, for example, because they were valuable to the team. So it wasn't professional, but it's what I would call semi-professional. So, and what it did was it gave those players, those Indian players, held a mirror up to them to say, whoa, we can do this. We can make this a serious going concern. We can be taken seriously, because they couldn't be taken seriously from a political standpoint. They were oppressed. They couldn't be taken seriously from a commercial standpoint, because the occupiers and the rulers, they had control of everything. They had control of the money flow and systems of government and all the rest of it. But for that 190-minute period, like, who was boss? For that 190-minute period, who was boss? It wasn't the Britishers, you know? And can you imagine, you're young, I'm a little bit older than you, Abhi, but can you imagine going back to that time where you have absolutely no outlet for your frustration, and then the team wins?
Yeah.
Wow. Can you put yourself in the mind of those players way back then? And they weren't necessarily predicted to win.
I know.
So, you know, you fast forward that now. We've just recently, I've been watching pictures on the news about what's going on in Jerusalem and the Palestinians under oppression. Can you imagine if Palestine, and that's the closest thing, if Palestine spanked Israel 5-0 in a football match? Can you imagine?
It'll be total chaos. It will be incredible.
It'll be a global story. So that's how big it was at that time. And I think I'm so glad you've asked the question, because, and it's no fault of theirs, a lot of young mariners don't understand. They might know the history, but they don't understand what it really meant way back then, because it's a long time ago. It's over 100 years ago.
Yes, it's almost 110 years old. It's like basically the story of 11 Bengali boys coming onto the pitch to revolt against oppression. It was something which I believe that it changed everything. And like you rightly said, that it's basically what defines our roots. Joe, that brings us to the next question, which is how do you think the introduction of ISL changed the scenario of Indian football? Do you think the inclusion of the fan-based clubs like Mohun Bagan and East Bengal last year changed the franchisee league?
That's a difficult question. It's a good question. It's a difficult question. Yes, it's changed Indian football. And in some ways, it has changed it for the better. In other ways, it's changed it for the worse. So what fans have to understand is the franchise system. You got to remember that the Indian Super League was established in part, one of the part owners, if you like, was IMG. Now, IMG are an American company, and the culture of American sport is the franchise system, which is why they did it off the back of the success of the IPL, which is also a franchise system. However, with the franchise system, it is very easy to just pick up a club and move it to another city. So the franchise system does not engender a fan base connection, because at any point in the future, the club can move. And then how do the fans from, you're talking about Mohun Bagan, can you imagine if they took the franchise of Mohun Bagan over to Bangalore? And all of a sudden, like, what? Where's the fan connection? You can't just go to the games at the weekend anymore, because you live in Calcutta, and you can't just suddenly get a job and move house and go to Bangalore. So so that's one of the problems with the franchise system. However, I'm a person who is involved in the business of sport, and I totally understand the business of sport. And the promotion and relegation element of a young, fragile system is not conducive to survival, financial survival. So I can understand why they ring-fenced it initially, so that you could not be relegated. And as a result of not being relegated, it meant that you were still guaranteed a certain amount of money in terms of revenue each season that you're part of the ISL. So I get that. Now, the worst things about the ISL were the first 1, 2, 3 seasons. I mean, it was total Mickey Mouse. You had players on massive salaries, big name, finished over-the-hill players. Was it Del Piero that played only 40 minutes?
Yeah, for Delhi. That's right,
Yeah, for Delhi.
Delhi Dynamos, right? Yeah,
Delhi Dynamos, yeah. Where Delhi Dynamos was the club that moved, wasn't it? And changed its name. So, sorry, what was I going to say? Yeah, so you had over-the-hill players that were overpaid. Remember, they were getting paid the equivalent of a season's salary in 3 months because they wanted all of this razzmatazz. Remember the dancing girls in season 1? I mean, come on, really? You know, that's like, it's not for me. So it's only now that I feel it's matured, and it's matured for the betterment of Indian football. What do I mean by that? I mean that the pool of real quality Indian players was tiny in season 1. And you could see that on the pitch. You could see it. There were some players that I wouldn't even class as semi-professional. They just weren't good enough to be there. That pool of Indian professional talent has increased because salaries have been a lot more stable. Instead of the nonsense that was going on in the I-League and still goes on in the I-League to this day, which is just tantamount to modern slavery, where a player that gets an injury, I mean, a lot of players are still on 9 and 10 month contracts in the I-League. 9-month contracts went out back in the 50s in Europe. So, they're on these short-term contracts. If they get an injury in month 7, their contract gets cut. How would you ever expect a player to give his all and to give his career, the best years of his life, to professional football if he doesn't know how long he's going to have a contract for, and if he gets injured, his contract is going to be cancelled? So that's the nonsense that had to stop and has stabilized a little bit with the advent of the ISL. So, and the other positive that's come from it is the match day experience. Look, the atmosphere of the Salt Lake Stadium is just uncomparable. And I'm so disappointed that the first season that East Bengal and Mohun Bagan are in the ISL, we were in the pandemic. That's sad. But at the same time, the match day experience was, up until the advent of the ISL, it was poor. The marketing was poor. The stadia were poor in terms of the what you could do in and around the stadium. I mean, you could barely buy a bag of peanuts at the Salt Lake Stadium ahead of the Calcutta derby. It's just nothing in comparison to what the rest of the world is like. So that needed modernized, and it has been modernized, and it's forced teams to get better quality training pitches. It's forced teams to relay and resurface their pitches at all the major stadia. And now the questions are being asked, which is a great topic that I'm so happy about. Now the questions, Abhi, are being asked about football clubs having their own stadia. I still think we're 5 to 10 years away from that, but at least the conversation is happening now. Instead of shared stadia with athletics and running tracks and municipality stadiums and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of good come out of the ISL. There's a few bad things come out of the ISL, but in the main, it has moved Indian football forward. What needs to happen next? The owners of the clubs and the franchises need to understand and to get into their little small brains that the most important thing is the talent on the pitch. And once you understand and you treat players like talent and not like slaves, you will make money. And I'll tell you why you will make money. Here we are in season 7 of the ISL. And still, I'm shocked that there's still not a burgeoning transfer market amongst Indian football players. Now, obviously, the first few seasons, it was the draft. I mean, oh God, come on. How pathetic is that? It was the stupidest idea. Just because it works for IPL doesn't mean to say it works in football. Now, we're starting to see 1 or 2 transfers. Not for big money yet, but it is happening. And I want to see that expand. And the reason I want to see that expand is because that is what will ensure the long-term survival of the football clubs, because they get no money from TV. They get negligible money from the stadiums on match day, ticketing I'm talking about. They don't get a lot of money from sponsorship. They did in the first couple of seasons, but that's kind of dried up a bit. So their major sources of revenue are going to be taking young talent, developing that young talent, and then selling it on or keeping that young talent for the betterment of their own club, or selling it on to another club. So in a nutshell, that's kind of.
So you've seen many young talents like Sana Singh, Liston, Kolaso, Manveer, and veterans like Ashutosh use the ISL platform to earn the national jersey. But there has been none from the I-League. So do you think the ISL is sort of demotivating players who play in the I-League?
No, because if you're an I-League player, I mean, look, let's get the elephant out of the room. The ISL is the top tier in Indian football. It's that simple. Whether you like it or not, it's the top tier in Indian football. To me, I don't care what it's called. I really don't care what it's called. I don't care whether it's called ISL 1, ISL 2, ISL 3. We need promotion and relegation. That is the only thing that's important to me. People are obsessed with ISL was this tournament that came along after I-League, so therefore it should be the second tier. No, it doesn't matter. It's not important. What is important is that there is an option for not only a club, but a team, not only a club, but a player to progress up, whatever that top tier is. Mohun Bagan were, and let's be frank about it, were in the I-League, right? Which it was really the second division of Indian football prior to last summer. Now they're in the top tier now. So it gives them the opportunity to progress, the clubs to progress, and they will earn bigger revenues in the ISL than they will in the I-League. And the same applies to the players. So it's not that they're being overlooked. It's just that, it is now, it is, I'm sorry to say, and I don't take any great pleasure in mentioning this, but it has become a lesser league, the I-League. So as a result, if you're a player and you're in the I-League, you should be looking to progress to the ISL, a young player, progress to the ISL, at which point you would hope to then progress and get into the national team.
Right. So it'll be sort of like a benchmark thing to pursue.
Yeah.
It's like something that every player should look forward to without getting demotivated. You should just look forward to give your best on the pitch in the I-League and progress to the thing.
Right. Now, let me just stop you there, because there's a caveat that comes with that. And that is, as long as the owners of the I-League clubs aren't stupid, number one, and number two, and I've seen some real serious nonsense in Indian professional football when it comes to owners and ownership committees, etc. As long as they're smart enough to say, look, we've got this young talent, we can't keep him forever because he is that good, he's going to want to move on, so let's maximize our return and sell him to an ISL club and get that money in, which helps us develop as a team and as a club. That's the smart thing to do. However, I don't know how many smart owners there are in the I-League, well, in Indian professional football to start with, but I can count them on one hand, the number of smart owners. And the reason is that what they do instead is they act like spoiled children and go, no, I'm going to, if this player tries to leave this club, I'm going to take him to court, I'm going to wrap him up in legal, I'm not going to pay him his salary, and he's never going to leave here, and he's just going to wither and die over the next 10 years. I'm going to kill his professional career. How small-minded and pathetic that is. It's childish and it's pathetic. If this talent can go on to a bigger and brighter level and can one day lead the Indian national team, you should be sending that player out of your club, getting money in return, but you should be sending that player with your best wishes, not being childish and saying, if we can't have that player, nobody else can. Oh, come on.
So another thing, it's in light to what you just now said about nurturing the real talent rather than using too much money on getting big players from outside to make the news heard. So for the past 25 years, very few players from Kolkata have made it to the national cap. Despite of there being thousands and thousands who are on the pitch every day practicing, dreaming to be a footballer. So what do you think, what are the factors which are lagging in Kolkata football? Do you think the infrastructure, the planning, what is it?
There's a number of factors, and unfortunately, up until recent years, all of those factors collectively have held back a lot of talent. And I feel sorry for talent that has come through in the last 2-3 decades because they just didn't have a chance. However, what I would say is that the biggest issue I see is football in the education system. And I've seen this with my own eyes firsthand, where a player is so good in a school team, he's banging in a hat-trick every single week for the school team. It's good for the school because they win the regional trophies, they win the interstate trophies, they win the national trophies. And yet the heads of schools will threaten the parents of that boy and say, if he goes to a professional academy, we will cancel his education. He can no longer come to school here. Because what they want is they are looking at the glory for themselves. You see what I'm saying? That school, the head of that school wants to be able to stand up and say, we won the national schools championships, or we won the regional trophy, or whatever. So what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing all of these, I'm seeing a lot of academies, I'm seeing, and many academies, unfortunately, are still money-making schemes and not really development schemes. I'm seeing a lot of players that have been lost in this school system as well. So that what happens is they can rise through these levels, get to a point where, let's say, for example, a 14 or 15-year-old at school who is just head and shoulders in terms of talent above all of his peers. All of a sudden, he cannot move to a professional academy because the school will threaten the parents. That's not right, is it?
Absolutely not.
It's sad and it's not right. The other side of it is some of them get to a point, and you've got to remember, because that, what we discussed before, you've got ISL, I-League 1, I-League 2. Everything else is not semi-professional. It's not. They'll claim to be semi-professional. The various state leagues will claim to be semi-professional, but they're not. They're amateurish. So you can get to a point and then it's just a cliff edge. How do you then progress? So the only way to do that, if you've got thousands of kids coming through this new system that you've created, and it's a brilliant system, great, all respect as to what's happened over the last few years, then they get to a point, but wait a second, there's only 11 teams in the ISL. And then behind, how many teams are in the I-League? 11, is it? So, and then in I-League 2, so let's say 34 teams in total, 34 professional clubs, and each of those professional clubs have a budget, so they can't just take the thousands and thousands of young professional talent. Now, we have 92 professional teams in England alone, all of which have an academy. You see what I'm saying? So that when you're looking for talent, all of those areas of the country, that's just England, by the way, that's not Scotland and Wales and Ireland. So when you have 92 clubs, you have 92 professional infrastructures for which players can be hoovered up like a vacuum cleaner and into that, and they can make a professional career out of it. So because once you get to 18, as you well know, you need to start being able to feed yourself, or you might have a family to support, or your family can't support you. So what are you doing? What are you doing? You need to make a dollar, or make a rupee. You need to make $1. So if you can get into a feeder system of a professional club, and you can get accommodation, you're going to get fed, that you're going to get some pocket money, then now you've got a chance. You've got a chance of making that your professional career.
Right. So I think, I just want to ask you this question. It's about in light to what you just now said about this question, which is, do you think the introduction of technology, the broadcasting, changed the mindset of parents? Like you just now said, in India, people are, especially in schools, people are not really encouraged. Like if we date back 20 years from now, never ever have I heard anybody encouraging to take up sports professionally. Like I have also played sports professionally for Bengal. I used to be a cricketer, but but 20 years back from now, there was a bit of compliance, where people used to sort of say ki pursuing football won't give you bread and butter. So right now, since now the foundations are changing slowly, international clubs are coming to India, trying to, set up camps and scouts to nurture talents out here. And especially with big leagues like ISL, which is right now on advertisements on TV, and people are having this sort of awareness, like this is big. So do you think that right now things has changed a little bit? Like when it comes to people motivating their children to go on and pursue football?
Oh, yes, the sentiment has definitely changed. Without question of a doubt, the sentiment has definitely changed. And you've got to remember, so there's a few things that have changed that have all fed into that, what you've just mentioned. So one is the stability of salaries. Secondly is, the gossip. Word gets around when, your family might know another family, or your father might know someone he works with whose son has got into an academy, and now he's on a professional contract. And he's only 18, 19 years old, and he's on 20 lakh a year. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, wow. And I can understand why parents didn't want their children to go into professional football. And when you say professional sport, you have to separate it out. There's certain sports in India which are very lucrative, even if you don't make it to the very top. Even if you don't play for the national team, you can still make a lot of money as a professional cricketer. That hasn't been up until the last decade. That hasn't been the case in Indian professional football and a number of other sports as well. So broadcast has changed the landscape a lot, and maybe we'll come on to ESL a little bit later on. But the most important thing is that broadcast deal. So I was tapped up. Is that what you call it? I was asked to host and to become the face of the very first season of the I-League, which was back in 2007. It's revamp. And would you believe the discussions were still ongoing about whether this broadcast and this whole production was going to happen 2 weeks before the start of the season. That's the problem. And that's now the problem with the I-League. So, one thing that they got right, very right, with the Indian Super League was that broadcast deal was in, and it was in early, and it was locked down, and the contracts were signed. If you have a broadcast deal, you have eyeballs. If you have eyeballs, then you have numbers. If you have numbers, then sponsors can look at that and go, oh, we can see how many people viewed, and you had pitch side hoardings, and you had advert spaces, but at halftime and before kickoff and full time, like any other football match. So now all of a sudden sponsors can get their brand seen. But if you're like the I-League was before, and still is to a large extent, whereby you don't have a confirmed, stable and regular broadcast platform, then why would I sponsor that? Hi, Abby. Is my advert going to be shown this Saturday at halftime? No, we're sorry, we didn't have the resources. We're not broadcasting that game. Oh, whoa, wait a second, Abby. You understand what I'm saying? So broadcast is a huge part of that, not only in terms of awareness, but in terms of revenue driving as well.
Do you think the heritage and the legacy of Mohun Bagan has been compromised after the merger?
Not really, because I have no doubt that at some point in the future, the ATK name will be dropped.
Thank you for watching Mariner's Talk with Joe Morrison. This is Abhinandan signing off. And before I sign off, I would like to request you all to follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mariner's TV. Please follow us and please extend your support. Joy Mohun Bagan, Joy Mohun Bagan, Joy Mohun Bagan.